Hey everyone, this is Jennifer with Midwest Wilderness Connections, and a few weeks back I drove past this railroad right-of-way, and then there's a country road here on the other side, and saw that there were prairie plants, native prairie plants, still growing in the right-of-ways between the road and the railroad. So I thought I would just run through here, show you some of the plants, and maybe you can find a prairie remnant that is somewhere nearby that you can kind of take ownership of, keep track of, let people know that it's there so we can protect them as much as possible. The railroads went through very early in Midwest history, so that's why prairie plants are holding on there, because they just haven't been disturbed quite as much as the rest of the landscape. So they're still holding these little jewels, these little areas of important prairie plants. So first we'll start out here. We are going to start with this ferny leafed plant here. We're going to look at this highly dissected leaf, not ferny, but highly dissected leaf. That is compass plant, and the reason they call it compass plant is because the leaves will align themselves north to south, which they are doing right now when it's hot, so that it can reduce heat stress. Because if it turns its leaves away from the sun, it exposes less of the leaf to sun. So that's one way to help it stay cool in a full sun prairie environment. So this is compass plant, that's Silphium. This is another Silphium here is Silphium integrifolium. This is prairie rosinweed. You can see it's got a real stout upward pointing leaves in their opposite. All right, the leaves are coming straight across from one another. We also have some of the native goldenrods here. This is most likely Canada goldenrod. Let me see. Oh, it's got some hairiness to it. I'm going to look that up just to make sure. Because, Canada goldenrod is probably right. If the stems were completely smooth, they didn't have any hairs, and a lot of times they're purplish, that could be giant goldenrod, which is another native goldenrod. Here, again, are some more that the Silphium integrifolium, rosinweed, prairie rosinweed, which also notice we've got going on here is we have a wild grape. This is the leaf to the wild grape. It's prairie riverbank grape, which is Vitis riparia. We also have down below here these three parted leaves that you see here. That is wild strawberry. Fougeraria is the genus for that particular species. We also have a dogwood here. They can be somewhat invasive and weedy depending on where they're at. So here's another Silphium. It was related to the compass plant and to the rosinweed, and the leaf is very big, broad, kind of arrowhead shaped or heart shaped. If you see the base there where the base of the leaf cups in, this is prairie dock. You can also see here there is red clover, which is exotic, can be invasive in prairie. We're going to take a step in now, and here, this fine-leafed plant. Let me see if I can get this positioned well. Here, I don't know if you can see that one, but that is gray-headed coneflower, Radibeta pinnata. We also have another really neat plant, important pollinator plant, is here. This is New England aster. It's very fuzzy. You can see the leaves are cauline. They attach right to the stem. There's no petiole. And so that's a really great nectar plant for later in the year. Now another plant I'm seeing here, there are various sedges. Here we've got milkweed, most likely just the common milkweed. There we go. So most likely common milkweed, which the monarch butterflies, their caterpillars use. It's the only host plant. There are many different milkweeds, and monarchs will use almost all of them. Now some of the milkweeds are more toxic than others, and so the monarch caterpillars will change how their feeding behavior, what parts of the plant they feed from, depending on the toxicity that are called cardinalides of the different types of milkweed, because there's a cost-benefit ratio to them. They're eating a poisonous plant and building up those poisons in the butterfly or in the caterpillar. And so, like I said, it can come as a detriment. If some of these cardinalides are higher, that starts making it slows down the growth of the butterfly, which means it stays in the larval stage longer, which then can cause problems because there's a greater chance of predation before they turn into an adult and then start feeding on flower resources, nectar. So the adults need flowering plants to feed them on their journey north in the spring and again south in the winter. Now we do have here, you guys can see this guy, that's a native bulrush. That is drooping bulrush. We've got a lot of brome, fescue, introduced grasses that have crept in here over the years. Sometimes these prairies can be fairly weedy because even though they were here originally, there are just so many invasive species that can hitch a ride along these roadways or along the railroad tracks and then get spread around. But you can still find some really neat stuff in here. So as I was talking about here, we're gonna get around some of these invasive trees. See what else we can find in this prairie. The thing about prairie is that you have to be in it to see it. If you just look at it, it's easy to miss the beauty and the intricacies. And so get in there, go down there and hop in and take a look. Now this is another one of the sunflowers. This one might be Jerusalem artichoke. Here are those highly dissected leaves again. This is the compass plant we talked about earlier. These yellow flowers, like Golden Alexander's, Zizia, and those are extremely important to early spring pollinators, especially like queen bumblebees that come out of a hibernation. They need that really important early food source to kickstart their year and to develop a new colony. Only the female bumblebees, the queens, not the females, but only the queens overwinter to come out the next year. The rest of the colony dies in the fall. Here, this three-parted leaf, that is wild strawberry, Fragaria. More of the silphium, quite a bit of silphium in this particular stand. Now the asters that I was showing you, the sunflowers I was showing you, are really important fall nectar sources and pollen sources for pollinators. They actually eat the pollen as well, or feed the pollen to their young. So having a good set of resources for both pollen and nectar to ensure you've got great habitat for pollinator species. If we go through, we're going to kind of step into this area. Here we have one of the roses. It's probably a wild rose. And what you do, look at these leaves and you count. These are actually leaflets. So this whole thing is a leaf. Each one of these is a leaflet. So this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaflets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 leaflets. So, you're going to have to count from using a couple of different leaves. Count their leaflets. That's going to help you identify to the species level, as well as look at the stems. And I don't have macro capabilities on here, but this is a very thorny, fine stems. Very fine thorns. And you look at the base of the leaf. See if I can find one here. And they're what are called stipules, which are just these little, let's see if I can show you guys these stipules. I don't know if you can see that or not. I'll have to find out. But at the base, there are these fleshy parts that come down and connect. That's how you can, that's a characteristic you can use to ID the plant. Also out here, this really beautiful grass, kind of long, tapering, it's blowing over. That's prairie cordgrass, extremely important plant. It's one of those foundational species for different types of wetland. That's an indication that this particular area gets a little bit wet, because it likes areas that are a little more on the wetter side. We also have this plant here. It's called dogbane, and a lot of people mistake it for a milkweed because it looks similar, and it has milky sap similar to a milkweed, but it's not. So it's just good to know that not all plants with white milky sap are milkweeds. You may need to take a closer look. So like I said, that's a Apocynon. Let's see what else we can find here. Here we go. We can get a lot closer to the native grasses in this area. Okay. So here we have prairie cordgrass, and in the old days, or even some ranchers still call this rip gut, because it's got a sharp, really sharpness to it and can cut. So it would cut the bellies of the cattle, or if you walk through it, it can kind of cut you. So you don't want to walk through an area of prairie cordgrass if you got shorts on or a dress or a skirt. Make sure you've got long pants on, or you're going to be very, very uncomfortable. I did that once with another grass. It's called rice cut grass, and I tell you what, those cuts really sting. You learn your lesson pretty quick. Here again, we've got the prairie dock, prairie rosinweed. We also have here, this here, it's called scouring rush. And the reason it's called scouring rush is that's a plant, it's like ferns, where they don't have seeds, they have spores. They were actually plants that existed earlier than the flowering plants. Used to be the dominant plant in these areas before flowering plants came on the scene. And the name scouring rush, it's an equisetum, and the name comes from the cells, the walls are really rigid because they include silica, which is like what's in sand or glass. And the early pioneers, Native Americans, would take scouring rush, ball it up, and use it to clean out, like a scouring pad, their pots and pans or anything that they were trying to clean with some sort of abrasion. Kind of have the same stuff right here for now. I know in Iowa, the prairie rosinweed, or not the prairie rosinweed, the prairie duck, that big leaf, that big broad leaf that I said was kind of arrowhead shaped, heart shaped. It's only really been found in railroad right-of-ways. So the conventional thinking is that, yes, it's a native prairie plant, but of more eastern prairies, not the prairies in Iowa. And that's one of those plants they think may have hitched a ride when the railroad was being built. The seeds were transported and deposited in these right-of-ways. So sometimes these right-of-ways, even though they're containing some native plants, not all of them are native to the local area. Here, this plant here, we talked about that once before already. This is New England aster. Like I said, it's got fuzzy stems. It has alternate leaves, which means it's got one step, two step, one step, two step. They're not directly across from one another. And they have auricles, which are these little wings. It's cauline. That means the leaf attaches directly to the stem. There are no petioles. And then it's got these auricles, or these little flaps or ears that extend past the stem. That's one way to help you identify that plant. What else am I seeing in here? I'm seeing, again, asparagus. That's not a native plant. It has hitchhiked and popped up in this area. We also have here, this is one of the larger, more robust sunflowers. This is likely sawtooth sunflower. With the sunflowers, they can be kind of tough to tell apart because they also hybridize, and you could get a couple that look the same. When you have the flowers, one of the best things to do is to take a picture of the front of the flower, but also take a picture of the back of the flower, because you want to be able to see what are called the bracts on the back of that flower, because that will help you identify the plant based on their shape. How many are they pointy, are they rounded, etc., etc. So here is the wild grape with some wild grapes. Really good wildlife food, especially if you're in your areas that have ornate box turtles. They like to eat a lot of fruit when the fruit is in season. Here we have a large shrub of multiflora rose. It's a non-native. It's a problem plant, but again, that's something transported it here. What we also have, they're kind of beat up right now, but this plant here, you can see it's got whorled leaves, which means the leaves are attached to the stem all the way around. It's not just opposite or alternate. That's a beautiful plant that is called Culver's root. Really pretty white flowers. Bumblebees love it. And what's great about these prairies, you can come back different times a year and you're going to see different plants every time. So to really understand what's in a prairie, you need to visit it several times.
That wraps up this impromptu prairie exploration. Please subscribe or follow the Midwest Wilderness Connections profile if you would like notifications for upcoming posts and videos. This is Jennifer from Midwest Wilderness Connections, thanking you for exploring our natural history with me today.